On February 15, 2026, the world lost one of the greatest actors who ever lived. But Robert Duvall didn't die in tragedy, scandal, or drama. He died at 95, peacefully, holding the hand of the woman he loved on a ranch in Virginia. A quiet death. Almost anticlimactic. Almost unfair for a man whose presence on screen could silence entire theaters with a single glance. 7 decades of work. 1 Oscar. 7 nominations. Roles that didn't just define generations, they redefined what it means to be an actor. He didn't play characters. He disappeared into them. To the point where you'd forget you were watching Robert Duvall and believe completely that the man on screen was someone else. Another life. Another soul. But here's what almost nobody knows. Before he became a legend, Robert Duvall was invisible. A nobody sharing a cramped New York apartment with 2 other struggling actors surviving on odd jobs that had nothing to do with art. While the world ignored him, he was learning something his prettier, more famous peers would never learn. How to inhabit truth. How to transform into anyone. How to make the impossible look inevitable. How did the son of a Navy admiral, raised in military discipline and rigid expectations, become the master of artistic freedom? What happened in those years of anonymity that shaped the actor who would conquer Hollywood without ever selling out to it? And why, even after decades of glory, did he find his greatest role not on a film set, but beside a woman 41 years younger, on a ranch far from the spotlight? Before we answer, we need to go back to the beginning. Because Robert Duvall's story doesn't start with fame, it starts with hunger. Robert Duvall was not born into Hollywood royalty. He was born into discipline, duty, and the unyielding expectations of military life. January 5, 1931, in San Diego, California, he entered the world as the second son of Rear Admiral William Howard Duvall, a man whose life was measured in rank and protocol, and Mildred Virginia Hart, an amateur actress whose creative spirit flickered quietly in the shadow of naval tradition. His childhood was spent moving from base to base, a Navy brat raised primarily in Annapolis, Maryland, where his father served at the United States Naval Academy. "I was a Navy brat," Robert would later recall. "My father started at the academy when he was 16, made captain at 39, and retired as a rear admiral." It was a childhood of starched uniforms and rigid expectations, where emotion was disciplined and dreams were practical. Through his mother, he carried the bloodline of General Robert E. Lee and the Lee family of Virginia. Through his father, the lineage of early Maryland settler Marine Duvall. Pedigree meant something in those circles, but young Robert felt the pull of something his family tree could not provide: the freedom to become someone else entirely, to shed the weight of expectation and step into 1,000 different lives. After attending Principia College in Illinois and serving in the Army during the Korean War, Robert made a decision that bewildered his military family. He moved to New York City in 1955, enrolling at the neighborhood Playhouse School of the Theater to study under the legendary Sanford Meisner, using the benefits for veterans to fund a dream his father could not understand. In those early New York years, Robert Duvall was invisible. Not the commanding presence who would one day silence entire theaters with a single glance, but a struggling actor sharing a cramped apartment with 2 other unknowns, Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman. 3 young men with nothing but hunger, scraping by on odd jobs that had nothing to do with art. Duvall worked as a Manhattan post office clerk, sorting mail in fluorescent-lit anonymity. He clerked at Macy's. He drove a truck. Hoffman cooked. Hackman hauled furniture. They were not stars. They were survivors, holding on to a dream the world had not yet validated. Duvall would later say, with characteristic honesty, that those years taught him more than any stage ever could. That resilience was not glamorous, that patience was brutal, and that success, when it finally came, would taste sweeter for every humiliation endured. His first significant role came in 1962, when he was cast in the film adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird as Arthur Boo Radley, the mysterious, shadowy figure who barely speaks, but whose presence haunts the entire story. It was a small role, but unforgettable. Duvall disappearing so completely into the character that decades later, people still whisper his name with reverence when they remember that film. He loved Boo so much, he later named one of his dogs after him. Other roles followed, each one a stepping stone in a career being built brick by brick. The bad guy opposite John Wayne in True Grit was Major Frank Burns in Robert Altman's MASH, the shaved-head lead in George Lucas's dystopian debut, THX-1138. These were not star-making roles. They were character parts, the kind that actors who understand the craft seek out, roles that demand transformation, not just presence. But Duvall was learning something his more traditionally handsome peers were not. He was learning how to inhabit truth, how to make audiences forget they were watching Robert Duvall and believe, utterly, that they were watching someone else entirely. He studied accents, mannerisms, regional dialects. He observed people in diners, on street corners, in bus stations. He became a collector of human behavior, filing away details he would later summon with devastating precision. By the early 1970s, Robert Duvall was no longer invisible. But he was not yet a legend. That transformation would require one phone call, one audition, and one role that would change not just his life, but the history of American cinema itself. The call came from a young director named Francis Ford Coppola, who was assembling a cast for a film about an Italian-American crime family. The role was Tom Hagen, the family's adopted son and consigliere, a lawyer, not a soldier. Calm, strategic, loyal. Duvall read the script and knew immediately. This was not just another role. This was the doorway to everything he had been preparing for since those cold nights in that cramped apartment with Hoffman and Hackman, dreaming of a future that seemed impossibly far away. The Godfather was coming, and Robert Duvall was ready. In 1972, The Godfather hit theaters like a thunderclap, and Robert Duvall's portrayal of Tom Hagen, the calm, calculating consigliere navigating the deadly politics of the Corleone family, earned him his first Academy Award nomination. He did not play Tom Hagen. He became him. The measured voice, the unreadable eyes, the stillness that radiated intelligence and loyalty. Critics called it a masterclass in restraint. Audiences simply called it unforgettable. Tom Hagen was not the loudest character in the room, but he was often the most important. And in Duvall's hands, the role became proof that power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. 2 years later, he reprised the role in The Godfather Part 2, deepening a character who had already become iconic. Hollywood took notice, and the invisible post office clerk from 2 decades earlier was now one of the most respected actors in the world. But Robert Duvall was not finished. In 1979, he reunited with Francis Ford Coppola for Apocalypse Now, stepping into the role of Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore, the surf-obsessed cavalry officer who delivers one of cinema's most quoted lines with chilling casualness, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." It was a small role, barely 10 minutes of screen time. But Duvall made it seismic. Another Oscar nomination followed. He was building a legacy, film by film, character by character. Network in 1976. The Great Santini in 1979, where he played a blustering, militaristic father with such raw authenticity that it earned him yet another nomination. Roles in True Confessions, on The Natural, and the epic television miniseries Lonesome Dove, which showcased his range and reminded audiences that great actors do not need big screens to command attention. Then came 1983, and the role that would finally bring him the gold statue he had been chasing for over a decade. In Tender Mercies, Duvall played Max Sledge, a washed-up alcoholic country singer trying to rebuild his shattered life in rural Texas. He did his own singing. He inhabited the character's brokenness so completely that audiences forgot they were watching a performance. When his name was called at the 56th Academy Awards, Robert Duvall walked to the stage as an Oscar winner, finally holding the recognition his talent had always deserved. But perhaps the greatest transformation in Robert Duvall's life came not on a film set, but in a restaurant in Buenos Aires in 2001. He was 70 years old, a three-time divorced man whose relationships had often withered under the demands of his career. That night, he met Luciana Pedraza, a 29-year-old Argentine actress and director. The age gap was 41 years. The world would whisper. But Robert did not care. What began as an unexpected connection deepened into something neither of them anticipated. Luciana did not see an aging Hollywood legend. She saw Bob, a man who loved great meals, deep conversations, and the Argentine tango. A man whose passion for storytelling extended beyond the camera into every moment of his life. 3 years later, in 2004, they married. She became not just his wife, but his anchor, his companion, his joy in a season of life when many men retreat into loneliness. Their life together was lived largely out of the spotlight, on his ranch in Middleburg, Virginia, where horses grazed and the rhythms of Hollywood felt mercifully distant. Luciana would later say that his passion for his craft was matched only by his deep love for characters, great meals, and holding court. A portrait of a man who had learned, finally, to balance ambition with contentment. Robert continued working even as the years accumulated. He directed films, The Apostle in 1997, a passion project about a troubled preacher that earned him another Oscar nomination, Assassination Tango in 2002. He appeared in Jack Reacher, Widows, and at 83 years old, earned yet another Oscar nomination for The Judge in 2014, proving that age had not dimmed his power, only refined it. But even legends are not immune to loss. In 2025, Gene Hackman, his old roommate, his fellow struggler from those desperate New York years, passed away. For Robert, the news landed like a blow. Hackman was more than a friend. He was a witness to the beginning. The man who had shared the hunger, the odd jobs, the rejections, the impossible dream that somehow became real. Dustin Hoffman remained, but now the trio was reduced to 2. And Robert, at 94, understood with painful clarity that his own time was growing short. Friends noticed a shift in those final months. He spoke more often about the past, about those cramped apartments and truck-driving days. He held Luciana's hand a little tighter. He spent long afternoons on the ranch, watching the Virginia countryside turn gold in the autumn light, content in a way that success alone had never provided. He had stopped chasing anything. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to build, only time left to savor. His body, which had carried him through 7 decades of grueling film schedules and physical transformations, began to slow. At 95, that is not tragedy. It is the natural order. He did not fight it with desperation or denial. He simply lived, quietly, gracefully, surrounded by the woman who loved him and the land that had become his sanctuary. And then, on a Sunday afternoon in February 2026, in the same Virginia ranch where he had found peace, Robert Duvall's heart stopped. Luciana was beside him. The room was warm. There was no panic, no struggle. On just the gentle exhale of a man who had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a body of work that would outlive him by generations. The world learned the next morning through Luciana's words, posted quietly on social media. Yesterday, we said goodbye to my beloved husband, cherished friend, and one of the greatest actors of our time. Bob passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by love and comfort. To the world, he was an Academy Award-winning actor, a director, a storyteller. To me, he was simply everything. No cause of death was announced, because none was needed. He was 95. He had lived a lifetime and then some. The only tragedy, if tragedy it was, is that the world would never again witness a new Robert Duvall performance, never again see him disappear into a character so completely that the line between actor and role dissolved entirely. But perhaps that is not tragedy at all. Perhaps it is the ultimate gift, to leave while still revered, still remembered, still capable of making audiences believe. Robert Duvall did not fade. He did not diminish. He simply finished, on his own terms, in his own time, surrounded by love. Robert Duvall leaves behind something far more enduring than awards or accolades. He leaves behind a masterclass in what it means to be an artist. Not a celebrity, not a brand, but an artist. Someone who understood that the work was sacred, that truth mattered more than vanity, and that the greatest performances are the ones where the actor vanishes completely, leaving only the character behind. Think of the roles that will live forever. Boo Radley, lurking in the shadows of To Kill a Mockingbird, a figure of fear transformed into grace. Tom Hagen, the calm eye in the storm of the Corleone Empire, loyalty personified. Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore, delivering madness with a smile on a Vietnamese beach. Max Sledge, broken and rebuilding, singing his way back to redemption. These are not just characters. They are monuments. Proof that one man, and through discipline and dedication, can create something immortal. In keeping with his wishes, there will be no formal memorial service. Instead, his family has asked that those who wish to honor his memory do so in a way that reflects the life he lived. By watching a great film, telling a good story around a table with friends, or taking a drive in the countryside to appreciate the world's beauty. It is a request that reveals everything about the man he was. No grand spectacle, no cameras, just life, lived simply and savored fully. He remained active until the very end, never announcing retirement, never declaring himself finished. He simply continued, working when roles inspired him, resting when they did not. His last years were spent in Virginia with Luciana, the woman 41 years his junior who became his everything. And their love story defied convention and proved that connection transcends age, that companionship can arrive unexpectedly, and that the heart remains capable of deep love even in its final chapters. When Luciana wrote that Bob gave everything to his characters and to the truth of the human spirit they represented, she was not exaggerating. Watch any Duvall performance, and you will see a man in service to something larger than himself. He did not perform for applause. He performed because the work demanded it, because the character deserved it, because the audience, strangers in dark theaters, deserved to witness truth, even if it was uncomfortable. His generation is disappearing. Gene Hackman gone in 2025. Dustin Hoffman, by now the last survivor of that cramped New York apartment where three unknowns dreamed impossible dreams. The era they defined, an era of raw, naturalistic acting that prioritized authenticity over glamour, is giving way to something else. But the films remain. The performances endure. And decades from now, people will still discover Robert Duvall for the first time and think, as millions have thought before them, this is what greatness looks like. Robert Duvall did not die tragically. He died peacefully at 95, having lived a life rich with meaning, love, and purpose. He leaves behind no scandal, no bitterness, no regrets aired in public. Only work that speaks for itself, a wife who adored him, and a legacy that will outlive all of us. If his life teaches us anything, it is this. Greatness is not measured in years, but in moments. At moments where we give everything to the truth, where we disappear into something larger than ourselves, where we love without fear and work without compromise. Robert Duvall mastered those moments, on screen and off, and in doing so, he became immortal. If you've ever been moved by his work, if you've ever believed in a character he created, leave a like to honor the man who gave 7 decades to his craft. Share this story with someone who needs to remember what true artistry looks like. Subscribe to celebrate not just the legend, but the quiet grace of a life well lived. Because Robert Duvall's final performance was the one he lived, a masterpiece of discipline, love, and dignity. And the curtain has closed not with tragedy, but with peace.